Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. Joining with me via Zoom is my guest, Steve Haworth. Welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Thank you.
Steve spells his name Haworth. And tell us how to pronounce that. Make sure we did it right.
Haworth.
Haworth. And Steve's going to share his story joining the church in September of 2020, roughly at about age 40, as a gay Latter-day Saint, and just his decision to why the church is the path that he's choosing right now, and how he's navigating that, like some of you are, as an LGBTQ Latter-day Saint. And I think our prayer is this podcast will be helpful for you considering joining the church, or those that are you that are trying to figure out if you're LGBT, or you're LGBTQ, if you can make your way forward in the church. And for the rest of us, leaders, parents, just allies that want to better support people. Steve grew up, he doesn't have any ties to the church until he moved to St. George. And I'll talk a little bit about that, and then getting connected with the church and his decision to join the church. Steve now lives in Montana. His father passed away and his mother is in Montana. Steve's mother is alive and still lives in St. George. And so what part of Montana do you live in, Steve?
Ashland. It's a little town in between a reservation.
And we are recording this in November. So here's Steve left warm St. George. He could have spent all St. George in the winter. And now you're going to spend, just like a good son, all of winter in Montana. So do you like the cold, Steve?
I do, yeah.
So you're okay with Montana cold?
Yeah, DC cold is, I'll be fine.
So, you could start wherever you want to start. I want to spend like at least, half the podcast roughly once you got baptized into the church, and maybe the first half, 30 minutes, pre-baptism. So I'll just maybe that's a general gauge, but I'll just let you go for it, Steve.
Okay. So maybe I should start probably when I was a little bit younger.
That's great.
I grew up Catholic, and then I jumped into the Foursquare denomination about maybe the age 15. And I had known I was gay then. And then when I came out, when I was a little bit, I was about 17, I think it was 16, 17 when I came out. I had started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. And so when I left, because of me being gay, they shunned me really bad. They never knew who I was. I'd see them at school. They wouldn't talk to me. They would come out. They would even tell me they wouldn't talk to me.
They would even tell you they wouldn't talk to you. That's pretty. Painful statement. When I went to church, I had to sit in the back of the Kingdom Hall, and so it wasn't until I was 18 that I started doing websites for people that were gay and Christian. And then I was living in Van Nuys, California at the time, and two missionaries came to, I don't even remember. All I know is they had flip charts back then. I went through the studying, but I just don't think I was really ready I didn't have a testimony like I do now. So I've always been really religious, and I've always really been, there was always something missing. And there wasn't a church I could really see myself in, because, being gay, and if anybody knows been to any gay churches, they're not exactly, there's a lot of drama, and it's just not,
it's like, it's okay to do this, but it's not okay to do that. It's like, you can't have your 1 foot, 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You have to be all either in or out. And that's kind of how I felt. And so it was really hard for me to be affiliated with any organization because I didn't believe in the Trinity. I didn't believe that when I died, that even if I was a bad person, I was going to go burn in hell. So I had a problem and I didn't know how. And so the only thing I could cling to was, well, Jehovah's Witness. And so I kind of went with that for a while. And then, when I eventually, when I was living in DC, I had gone, spent majority of my life in DC. I ended up getting married. We won't talk about the first one. We'll just talk about the second one.
That's fine.
The doozy. That's the doozy one. There was just a lot of drugs. It was really bad.
And for our listeners, I'm assuming you're marrying a man because you're gay.
Yeah.
Versus trying to make a mixed orientation. So this is a same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, that part's really a long story. So it just came down to that person kind of getting into some trouble. There were drugs involved. I got involved in it. And it just wasn't good. We end up moving to his mom's house. Mind you, I'm 38, 39 years old. I think 39 at the time. And so everything was blamed on me. Everything was my fault. And so I just came to the point where I had no place to go. And since my mom lived in St. George area, I ended up moving to St. George. And that was in 2019 that I had moved there. It was, I want to say, because I started working at Staples in probably May of 2019. I was fortunate to transfer out there. So in doing so, every corner, there's a church. Literally right around the corner from my mom's house was a church. And I pretty much, I started asking coworkers questions. A lot of them were members of the church. It got to the point where I went to Deseret Book, which is right next door. And I would go get literature. I would take it home with me. At night, I would read. I picked up one book by James Farrell about forgiveness. The Peace Giver, I think is what it's called. No, that's not the one. It was about forgiveness, and it really helped me. It was the first book that I read that was written by a member, and it helped me because of the marriage that I was in, because I had obviously moved, got a plane ticket, flew to St. George from Washington, D.C. Instead of on the streets, I was literally at the airport for 24 hours waiting for my flight to fly out. And so anyway, that was the first book that I read, and that really helped me a lot in kind of getting a testimony of the gospel. And so I tried to set up a meeting with the missionaries. Of course, I was too impatient, so I got online and I talked to sister missionaries and missionaries online, and eventually got connected with the missionaries in my area. And then I told them that I was gay, and I told them the situation and that I was, had kind of studied, started studying kind of, I tried to start in the Book of Alma. That didn't really work out so well. Go read from the beginning to the end. And so that's kind of where it kind of all started. And then it was just a process. I would meet with the missionaries every at least once a week. I would continue to ask questions to coworkers. I don't think I started going to church until I think like August, because I was afraid of going by myself. I didn't want to go alone.
Honest.
I don't know. I don't know why. It just didn't. I didn't go until I think it was August of September of might have been a little bit earlier than that, but yeah.
You're doing a good job, Steve, of telling your story. Lots of questions come into my mind. Tell me about the reaction of the missionaries when you told them they were gay. You were gay. Did they pull away? Was it neutral? Were they supportive? Just talk about that part of your story.
The first set were kind of didn't pull away per se, but I don't know. I don't think they were expecting it.
Probably true.
I don't think they were expecting that part. The missionaries after that of course, I'm friends with them still. So the missionaries that came after them were totally accepting and totally cool. And they actually stayed the longest in my area, probably because due to COVID-19. So I was kind of fortunate because even though I had moved to somewhere else, I was still stayed in my old ward that I, was going to get baptized in. And so I somehow end up moving and getting my own place and going back into the ward, the ward boundaries that I wanted to be in anyway, the stake. So I was kind of fortunate that I was able to, even though I went to a different ward, I was baptized into the ward that I had originally started with. And then I went into another ward because of the ward boundaries and stuff like that. So it was kind of really awesome. So the missionaries actually, after that, were really accepting. Towards the time before I left, I tend to scare people a little bit, not scare them, but, make them feel uncomfortable and see how far I can get. But like I said, I for the most part, a lot of people at the MTC knew about me. It was really weird.
That's cool.
So I actually have had a really good experience. It hasn't really been bad at all.
I wish in our mission prep classes, because all of our sons have gone to mission prep classes, but I don't think they've ever talked about how to teach an LGBTQ investigator. So it doesn't surprise me the missionaries were taken back, I think is your words, because there's been, unless it's been provided in the home, I'm not aware of any formalized training missionaries receive, maybe at the MTC at this point, that, the church is for LGBTQ people and this is who they are and this is what we teach about them. And getting baptized didn't change your sexual orientation. I assume you walked out of the font, you were still gay. You're smiling. And maybe in another, I'm being a little silly there, but there's probably some missionaries and some members that would think maybe that changes, or maybe we can't teach gay people. Talk about when you say the second set of missionaries what did they do just to give you that feeling of being loving and accepting? This is sort of you, because obviously they taught the doctrine of our church. It's not like they created new doctrine and to help you feel accepted in our church. They taught the same things as all the missionaries, but there was something about them. You just felt acceptance and love and support. Just talk about that.
I think, one of them had been out a little bit longer on his mission, and then the other one hadn't been out that long. And so between the both of them, they, like I said, COVID kind of kept them together for a longer time. So I got to spend a lot of time. I mean, they hung up Christmas decorations, outside, and we got to, we built a really good friendship. I mean, they're both out of their mission now. One's married already, and the other one is going through school, and we all talk all the time, or try to as much as we can. But they were always just, I just felt comfortable, and they kind of understood. Obviously they didn't know how I feel, but they could understand. If that makes sense. I don't know.
It does. And I like just some of the things you're saying, like they were present with you and they didn't pull back. It sounds like they just treat you as a fellow human.
Yeah.
They weren't, there was probably less homophobia that somehow they had to pull away, or this was contagious. I'm being a little silly here, but some people might think, they just saw you as a human being and were present in your life and wanted to be in your life. It didn't sound like it was out of duty. It sounded like they were genuine friends and continued to be friends.
Yeah.
Tell us their names. Give us, just in case they're listening, or if you're okay, give them a shout out.
So you have Ethan Olson, and Nathan Hess, and I always get. So it's funny because I always call them by their last name because it's just easier, because Ethan and Nathan are just this weird. But yeah, we're really good friends. We talk all the time. Like I said, when I got my endowment, one couldn't go. The other one didn't get his recommended time, but he met me outside.
That's great.
So it was really good to, and they both were there for my baptism. One of them baptized me, the other one confirmed me into the church. And so we're just really good friends.
Talk about, I think listeners have picked up just in your story that you're deeply committed Christian, deeply believing in God, and and exploring multiple religions to sort of find the right spot for you. And I think you referenced Jehovah's Witnesses. You may reference some very supportive LGBTQ base, but none of those quite resonated with you. So it's not like you were coming from no perspective, and this was your first experience to any Christian religion. And so with that perspective, and you're in your 40s at this point, or late 30s, talk with our listeners what's unique about the church. What unique doctrine appealed to you, or unique teachings, and then I'm going to maybe ask you a second question about being LGBTQ, just why it felt better to you, and maybe that's the same question, why it felt more of a home for you as a gay human.
So the Book of Mormon was kind of one of the things that I guess I didn't fully quite understand. And so that was one of the things I didn't understand. I didn't understand the Book of Mormon. And it wasn't until, I guess, the whole plan of salvation and listening to the, reading on the premortal life, and how, Adam and Eve, they sinned, but there had to have been a reason for them to sin, because what are they going to do? Sit in the garden and be there all day and just do the same thing repetitive? So that, there had to be something more to it. And so that kind of, the premortal existence was kind of a big part of it. But it was also linking the Book of Mormon to the Bible, where when Lehi left and was told to leave. And so that's kind of besides the doctrine of like the Trinity. That was the biggest thing for me. Uh, I didn't believe in that. I didn't believe that, when you die, you go to hell and you're, fiery brimstone. So that was kind of some examples. And it wasn't until I think I really started studying and looking up YouTube videos about where Lehi went, and Book of Mormon Central and stuff like that. And then I kind of, praying about it, and certain things happened, and it just kind of all fell into place.
That's it. Thank you for that. And it's interesting, the plan of salvation really resonated with you, just this context of the premortal life and why we're here and where we're going, the Book of Mormon. And I remember my own missionary days, a lot of times when we teach things like about the Godhead as three distinct beings, a lot of people would said, well, I've always believed that anyway. My church doesn't quite teach that, but it's always resonated more with me. So sometimes it's like coming home, where there's beliefs the church has where you're not changing your feelings to match the church's beliefs. It's often what people have felt. And it's like coming home sometimes. Talk about, I think listeners are picking up, you're doing a lot of due diligence, and which is the way I think investigators are joining the church these days. They're not, your only source of information is not just what the missionaries are presenting. So when I served in 1980, in England, really the only source of information the members, investigators were getting were largely just what we presented to them and perhaps their family and friends. But you have got the internet and you've got YouTube. And so you're meeting with the missionaries and sounds like you're doing a lot of due diligence. Talk about, and this is kind of leading to that second question, you're probably trying to figure out how the church feels about gay people. I assume before you got baptized, you wanted to get some understanding about that. Just talk to us a little bit about what you're finding out and how that compared to other faiths you've been aware of or involved with.
So you always hear people left the church because of policies and procedures that the church has stance on, the proclamation. It kind of bothered me at first, but I had to actually really look at the whole picture and not just, okay, well, the church's stance is that, I can't marry another man, or I can't, have a loving relationship and stuff. And it still kind of bothers me a little bit today, but I've realized that you have to have faith, because without faith, and having a testimony, then what's the point? And so my decision to join the church was based upon me knowing that it's the truth, and that there is a living prophet. It is a living church. You don't find that anywhere else. The people are very friendly. I tend to be quiet and shy a little bit, so I don't like to go up to people unless I know you. But I am, and when you get to know me, I'm very outgoing. And so the church, people are very friendly. They're very outgoing and non-judgmental. I defend the church on Facebook with some groups that I'm in, and there have been comments that have been made by church leaders in the past, and I'm trying to remember where that quote was at, but there were comments made by church members, and I kind of cringed when I heard them, and I was like, ugh, and they kind of bothered me a little bit. And so now when I hear this person speak, he seems to be a little bit more sensitive when he's speaking, and you can tell that he's changed a little bit in the way that he says things. And so, and people have to also remember that God's church is run by imperfect humans, and that's kind of that's my take on it.
It's a good take. I think it's a sustainable take, where you're recognizing the restored doctrine that came through the prophet Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, the plan of salvation, and a church that's making progress on better supporting its LGBTQ members. I think it's okay to acknowledge painful experiences and painful things that I have said. I've said some painful things. Leaders have said. I'm not a leader, but I was just a rank and file member. I've said painful things that I would now cringe if I said them to myself. So I think that's part of doing better. But I think part of healing and providing hope is just acknowledging painful and not calling you less faithful or less committed for recognizing that there's an institutional side of our church. There's a human side of our church that just is working in this area. And you've done a really good job of navigating that. Talk about your decision. I'm asking you a lot of questions. But if you just want to, are there things right? Let me ask this question. Are there things right now you want to share?
You can ask me questions.
Talk about this panel you went to in St. George. Talk a little bit about that panel and if you were an investigator, a member at that point, and what was put on and your thought on that.
I had been just baptized, actually. I had just been baptized, and the missionaries told me about a panel discussion by an institute teacher in St. George. And so I went, and it was about LGBT, and it was Listen, Love, and Learn was the title of because he went and talked about mental health. He talked about all kinds of different issues, but this panel was about LGBTQ. And so then it just kind of changed my perspective a little bit. I mean, it kind of made me feel a little bit better, but then it opened up more questions for me. Like, okay, well, the plan of salvation is for me to be happy. I'm not entirely happy because I want a relationship, but I want a relationship that is that's faith-based, that is, somebody that I can study the scriptures with, I can come follow me with, it sounds ridiculous. But that's what I want. That's what I want. And so it just, all these questions and started coming that I needed answers to. And so I talked to one of the brothers. He had gone through the temple. He's obviously younger than I am. And so we became friends. And then I met with the institute teacher, and him and I talked, and him and I became good friends, and him and I went for a long walk, and he asked me questions and stuff about how I felt and what I felt about certain scriptures and what I felt about the policies and stuff like that. And, policies are policies, but scripture is scripture. And so we just had this different conversations. But it definitely was an eye opener. And, made me want to um, there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of organizations out there that are supportive of LGBT, but there's no organizations that actually talk about the scriptures that are most used against homosexuality. And that's kind of where I guess I kind of want to explore that part of it.
I love this panel. I think the panel members were LGBT. I think that's best when we have LGBTQ members come and participate in panels versus allies. I've always tried to defer to LGBTQ. I love this institute teacher, and you became friends. I love that you just went on this long walk where I sense he was safe for you to talk about everything in your heart. And I think that's a principle of ministering and discipleship. And he probably doesn't have all the answers, but he's willing to listen to all the thoughts of your heart and willing to learn from you so that he could do better as an institute director because he's got LGBTQ students. And I'll bet you helped him. And it helps all of us just to feel understood and heard. So I love some principles in that whole experience. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about, you're kind of a student of the Old and New Testament and scriptures that talk about homosexuality. Do you want to address any of that? So sometimes people say Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because of homosexuality, and some people don't feel that's true. We all agree Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because of wickedness, but to just pin that exclusively on homosexuality is something that some faithful Latter-day Saints, I don't know, some do not agree with, while at the same time agreeing with the doctrine of our church. I don't know if you want to talk about any of that. You've studied that, Steve. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So yeah, Genesis 19 is one of those that, I guess even if you go back to the Levitical law, the Israelites were supposed to be God's chosen people. And so one thing that I've kind of, through my personal study and in the past, and it's not something I've talked to like church members, except for one person from the Institute, but is that Israel was given a certain, they were God's chosen people. They were to follow 613 laws. And if they broke one of them, they broke all of them. So, so people like to use, I think it's what Leviticus 18:22 against, homosexuality. Sodom and Gomorrah is another one that the word to know, and I don't know Hebrew and Greek. I only know what I've researched on my own or have read other sources. But to know could mean many things. It could be to have sex with. It could be to just know. My understanding, the custom in biblical times, in ancient times, is that when visitors would come into the city, they weren't treated so nicely. They were taken outside the city gates and they were raped. And so you have all these customs and stuff that people don't talk about, with Sodom and Gomorrah, that they were just so wicked. And that's why they were destroyed. And I think there's a I'm trying to remember where it's at though. It's in Ezekiel, where it talks about that the reason why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed was it was because of their sinfulness and that they disregarded, the needy and I don't know exactly remember where it's at. And then you also have New Testament, And one of my favorite scriptures is Romans 1. And in Romans 1, Paul, people always like to quote only one part of the scripture. And if you read the whole thing, let's see. So some people like just to read Romans 1, and they use let's see, I think it's verse 26. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was met. And a lot of people like to use that that passage saying that homosexuality is wrong. But if you go back and you read from the very beginning of Romans 1, and you read all the way up to about verse 28, I mean, even if it wouldn't hurt to read the whole chapter, it also talks about what they were doing in the temple, because back then there was a lot of temple prostitution. And Paul was calling them out on it. And I think people get that kind of confused with, because Jesus never really said anything about homosexuality. Which, if he did, I think things would be a lot different. But he didn't say anything about it. So there's numerous scriptures, and I at some point someday I'll get them compiled and stuff. But back then in Paul's day, that was one of the issues, was the whole thing with the temple prostitution and the things that they did, and they worshipped other creatures and they worshipped idols. And in the process of doing that, they were also doing these defiled things in the temple. And so that's my take on it. And from what I've read and what I understand.
And I just am glad to hear your feelings, Steve. You've thought more about this than I have. You've directly impacts you. I like to hear, I think, the feelings of gay Latter-day Saints on all these scriptures that we point to at times. I think it's fine to point to these scriptures and talk about them. I worry and just have fact-based discussion like you're having right now. I think when we weaponize them and we paint broad brushes about Sodom and Gomorrah was completely okay, except, it was just homosexuality that got them destroyed and everything else. And I think you do a good job of saying there was lots of things going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's don't weaponize that in an emotional sort of way that just is not helpful to a fact-based discussion about what these scriptures mean. And so I think that's fine for me and others to talk about this. You've obviously thought more about it. It affects your life. You're trying to make your way forward. I hope everybody senses that everything you're trying to do is faith-based. You're deeply committed to faith and wanting to have a relationship with the Heavenly Father and the Savior. And you have never walked away from, you haven't always been perhaps involved in organized religion, but you've always been connected to God. And I love your desire. You'd love to have a faith-based relationship where, you would not be studying Come Follow Me alone. And so my heart goes out to you, because that's, my wife and I can study Come Follow Me and watch those videos and those great lessons. And you're kind of doing that on your own. And there's a natural, normal desire for companionship, just to share your life with somebody. And I think we can acknowledge that if you want to stay within the teachings of our church, that's not an option that's really available to you. And we just try to help you belong and feel you're needed and acknowledge the complexity of your path. And are grateful for your contributions and your voice. Talk about your decision to go to the temple. So I think people pick that up. You not only got baptized, but you decided to go to the temple and take out your endowment. Talk about that, or anything else you want to talk about.
So I kind of, with this whole thing with being being gay and a member of the church, I really wanted, one thing I did leave out is I wanted to, I wanted to get my patriarchal blessing. That was the first thing I did. And it, not because I didn't grow up in the church, I didn't know what to expect. So I get my patriarchal blessing, and I, given the phone number to the brother, and he's setting up a time with me, and I'm like, okay. And so, we set a time up, and I go over there to his house. I had the missionaries go with me at the time. And so they got to be there. And what was really awesome is that doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't know my situation. He doesn't know, he barely knows my name. I mean, he knows my name because I gave it to him, but he has no way. He doesn't know me. So it was interesting, because I didn't know how long the patriarchal blessings were. I didn't know if they're like, a page long, or so, my understanding is they could be a paragraph, they could be a page and a half, it could be 2 pages. So it was really interesting. So I get my patriarchal blessing, and I was just kind of like in awe, because it didn't say anything about marriage, but it did talk about not to turn down callings, and it said that by my actions I would bring people to the gospel, and so that was the first one. Besides getting the Melchizedek priesthood, so I got the Melchizedek priesthood first, and then I got my patriarchal blessing, and then I, of course, had to wait a year to go to the temple, and I was trying to do this before I moved to Montana. So they fit me in, they got me in to the temple, and that was maybe a month ago. That I went to the temple and got my endowment, and it was a lot to take in, and stuff, and it was just really awesome to be able to go there. But now I live 2 hours away from the temple.
What was awesome about it? Without, I guess you can't get into total detail, but just share with listeners what was awesome about it.
It was overwhelming. I will say that it was very overwhelming. I obviously had somebody there to help me go through the process and stuff. But it was overwhelming. I wasn't really like nervous. I thought I was going to be, but I wasn't. It was just a lot to take in.
That's honest. That's good.
It was an awesome experience.
And I think as you continue to go back, it continues. I always thought, for listeners that are new to the temple, I've always thought there's phase 1 of just getting used to all the logistics. And you get used to all the logistics and just the physical things that go on there, just moving around. And then you can really get into just the content being shared with you in the spirit. It's not just comes in stages neatly like that. It kind of overlaps, but that's been my experience a little bit. And I love that you went to the temple. And I love that you have those added blessings in your life. I think on the simplest forms, the temple is just more covenants. It's 5 more covenants that bring blessings that are available to you in your life. And if you look back, I mean, here's a question for you. You were in some really dark places in DC. I don't know if that's been the darkest time of your life, but go back to the darkest time in your life. Let's say it's wherever you want to go and just talk to your younger self. Because here you are at 42, where you are now, with you just in a good spot. And maybe your younger self at some point didn't have hope that would ever happen. This is kind of you talking to people also that have kind of lost hope or in a really dark spot. Just talk to your younger self right now.
The darkest spot was probably the drugs.
With drugs.
The drugs. Because I did drink, but when I did drugs, I didn't drink. So that kind of so it really wasn't until, like I said, I moved to St. George. I completely stopped. Like I'll be honest, I was probably high when I got on the plane or coming down off of it. Um, uh, yeah, and then never thought that I would ever join the church. I never thought that I would ever join the church. And so I know that obviously, God works in mysterious ways. And even though we may not understand things at the time, or we may not understand everything the gospel has to offer, that at some point it will be revealed. I think that's one of the things that kind of keeps me going is just, I don't know everything, and I probably won't. Maybe I might not even get married. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if policies are going to change. All I know is that I know that the gospel is true. I know that as long as I keep my covenants, that as hard as it is sometimes, um, not thinking of it as enduring to the end, like as a long thing, but just taking it day by day. I mean, going back to that place where I was at in DC was really dark. Um, um, yeah, it was really bad.
For any of us, we've all sort of been in those DC moments and really dark places. And sometimes we have to physically get on a plane, but sometimes that's symbolic of what we need to do to get ourselves in a better situation. And look at where you are now. I think if you could have seen your younger self could have seen you now, he wouldn't believe it. Obviously, a member of the church, been through the temple, in a really good spot, this patriarchal blessing that talks about you accepting callings and blessing people's lives, which I'm sure happened in St. George and will happen in Montana as your local congregation becomes more familiar with you and puts you to work and you help us create Zion. But I love your courage to get on the plane. And in that case, to physically separate yourself and knowing what you need to do and recognizing that was a great unknown to fly to St. George, Utah. But the courage it took to do that and wondering, you're leaving a lot behind. And I think that's symbolic of what sometimes all of us need to do as we're moving forward. And where you are now, talk about, a lot of gay Latter-day Saints, they say, I don't know my future. Sometimes they'll get asked, well, do you think you'll ever marry a man if you're gay, or a lesbian, or a gay woman, or would you ever marry a woman? And some say, I'm pretty sure I'm going to just be alone the rest of my life, celibate. Some say, I'm just taking this at a day at a time. I just don't know completely how my future is going to fold, but I'm willing to live the teachings of the church right now. I'm willing to get baptized and say, I'll live the teachings of the church, but I don't necessarily know exactly my entire future at this moment. I'm just going to do the best I can. Kind of, do you want to address that, of just how you're navigating that?
Um, so I literally, I obviously I live in the middle of nowhere. Um, and yeah, it's taking it day at a time. And I think that I need to concentrate on studying more. And when that time comes, or if that day happens, then it happens. But it's just this. It's just study. It's just, for me, it's, I need to study and to continue to study, and continue reading, the Book of Mormon, the Bible, Doctrine and Covenants, and just study. And I don't know what. I honestly don't know. But I would love to be in a relationship and have somebody to study with, come follow me with. I know people in the church that are in a living situation. I'm not sure how that works out, but I know that however that works, you know, I just take it day by day. It's really all I can do.
It's a great answer, Steve. And I think you're pretty self-aware of just what is best for you right now. And I think just continue to get grounded as you're doing in the church and in the teachings, and just building this foundation. I think all the building blocks are there with the temple and the baptism, but I think you're self-aware enough to sort of say, this is what I need to continue to do, is build my foundation. I love that you're studying, come follow me, and watching the videos. And I hope that this new ward works out for you, and there's a real feeling of belonging there, like there was in St. George. And then I think it's okay for, even though I asked Steve that question, I think it's okay for us as Latter-day Saints not to look at every celibate in the church, a Latter-day Saint that's gay or lesbian, and just continually wondering, are they going to stay in the church? Or are they going to end up in a same-sex marriage? Let's just sort of, it's probably not our business, even though I asked you the question. Let's just love them where they are and support them where they are and trust them as they make their way forward, and not define our relationship with them over this question, and just trust them as they're making their way forward. They'll continue to make the right decisions for them. And it takes great courage to join the church, not knowing exactly how your future is going to work out. And I think it's a good. I think it's a good thing you join the church, no matter how your future works out. And I would say it's a good thing you went through the temple, no matter how your future works out. I think those just give you added spiritual foundations and tools and blessings in your life to make your way forward. So I wouldn't want to add a baptism question to, are you willing to keep the teachings of the church today and for the next 80 years? I mean, it's sort of inferred you're going to do your best, but I think we just extend the grace that you're obviously going to teach teachings of the church as you're baptized, but you may not know exactly how it's going to work out over the next 50 years, and how church policies may change over the next 50 years. And maybe you'll be alive in 50 years. You'll be 92 to tell us how it all worked out. So it's just a complicated space, listeners. And I love that Steve's in the church, and I love that we're trying to listen, we're trying to learn, we're trying to create a feeling of belonging that actually we're better off with Steve. He's better off, but we're better off. And as I come back to your patriarchal blessing, let's make the promises of your patriarchal blessing possible for people that are in your life to give you the opportunities that talks about. Some of those will come informally, like a podcast you're doing now, or just the outreach you're doing on social media. But some will come in a formal way in church callings that you receive. And your ability to help other people understand the church. And because are a convert, sometimes convert voices are the very best voices for others that are considering joining the church. And there's a lot of LGBTQ people out there that are investigating our church right now because of the things that you're drawn to. And so that's a good thing, I think. And there's people in the church that can relate to them and sort of be a little bit further down this path. More things. We're kind of to the end of the time, but I want to make sure that we've got everything you'd like to share. Other thoughts that come to your mind you'd like to share, Steve?
Yeah, I think the church has changed. I mean, 20 years ago, when I was investigating or talked to the missionaries and they got the flip charts out, I didn't join. And a lot of things have changed over the last 20 years. And it's just having that faith. I know I said it before. It's easier said than done. I could tell you all day, my faith is strong and stuff like that. And there are times that it's difficult, and there's going to be difficult times. And I know that, but I know that as long as I have faith and I read scripture, I do devotionals, I watch BYU TV, I watch, I just try to, listen to, church music, try to just keep myself occupied with the gospel. And that kind of helps, and that helps me anyway. I mean, again, it's not easy, it never will be, but nobody said it was going to be. I think Alma 37:37 is one of my favorite scriptures. And it's just, continually praying day and night. And there's a couple other ones. There's at Ether 12:7. I love the gospel. It may be hard sometimes, and difficult, but I wouldn't be I would not be where I'm at if it wasn't for it. I wouldn't.
It's a great closing testimony, Steve. And I join my testimony with your testimony that this beautiful restored doctrine that came through the restoration is blessing your life, and it's blessing my life, and it's blessing millions of other people's lives. And firsthand that your life is very different than it was in Washington, D.C. And credit to you for doing the things you needed to do to be where you are now. And I think that makes the rest of your life possible because you have this great foundation now, and you still want to continue to build on this foundation. I love your faith-based testimony. I just pulled up Steve's Facebook page, and he's got a picture of Steve and looks like 4 missionaries or 4 friends as you're standing outside the temple. I mean, you just look great. And I love what you put in your profile. Loves the Book of Mormon, talks about our Savior's atoning sacrifice for us. And you're all in, Steve. And you look great. And this is a great podcast. And I will just, we're friends now for life. I will just enjoy seeing how your life unfolds. And I sort of think this is a huge pivot point, obviously. And a lot of your, post-Washington, D.C. life is unfolding, but especially now being in a church and just gone through the temple. And the next next chapters of your life are going to be great chapters. And I think the promise of that patriarchal blessing will be one of the key parts of the next chapters. And that will be helpful and healing to you to know that you're able to help other people, and people will connect with you on this podcast. Listeners will link to Steve's Facebook page in the podcast description, so you can find Steve on Facebook and message him if you want to connect with him. And is that okay if we do that, Steve?
Yeah, that's fine.
So we'll do that so you can find Steve, and perhaps he can help you in your journey. So this is Richard Ostler. We're recording this on a Sunday. Good day. And Richard Ostler and Steve. Now I got to say your name right again. I'm not going to say Haworth. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So we're signing off on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.